Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Systane Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Systane Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
Ah, DSW, birthplace of the humble brag. Here, the shoes are so good, no one would ever know how little you paid. If you didn't go telling everyone, that is. And with never-ending options for every style, mood, and occasion, all at really great prices, we'll definitely give you something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands. Or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget at DSW stores or DSW.com.
A warm from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Obviously, earlier in the week, we saw some pretty shocking news out there in Auburn. The fact that Bruce Peal decided to step down, and now his son is Stephen Pearl. He is now the new coach for the team, so we've got ourselves a lot of fun to be taking a look at there. We're going to be getting the vibe all around that program. We're going to be taking a look at just what we've seen with these coaching changes in general. It's actually interesting. I did not know this when I had Blake Lovell on for the interview, and I find out mid-interview that he actually coached against Kevin Glitner, the new coach over at Wofford. So we're going to be talking about that ordeal. We're sort of going to be power ranking the three situations that we've seen with these coaches over the last few weeks. St. Joe's, Wofford, Auburn, which team is in the best circumstance, which team is in the worst. Spoiler, I think that it's Wofford, and I don't think that it's close. So we're going to be discussing that, and we also have to ask Blake about some of the teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on in terms of the upcoming season. There's one SEC team that he feels like is flying a little bit under the radar. So we've got a lot of fun to chat with Blake about today. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want with EdgeBoost. 100% of gambling transactions, they do get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. And how about if we do have a nice quality chat with our good friend Blake? He does such great work over at Southeastern 16. I know that he is very hard at work getting set for what is going to be an amazing college basketball season, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, I'm sure that you have been very busy the last 48 to 72 hours over there at Southeastern 16 because, well, we saw the news of Auburn. Bruce Pearl is no longer going to be their coach. There's lots of speculation as to whether or not he's just going to lead a quiet life, whether he's going to go into Senate. We're not really concerned about that. What we are concerned with is that his son Steven now takes over the program. Just how is this being received by the Auburn players? Because we've seen a few coaching changes happen late in the process over the last few years. Some of them get received very well. Some of them, well, not so well. We'll talk about one in a few minutes. But that said, what has been the vibe a little bit around Auburn the last few days?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting because, look, I mean, the way they did this whole thing with the timing and all of that, I mean, you could see just the video that Auburn released. This wasn't something that was just spur of the moment. They decided, all right, Bruce Pearl has said he's going to retire, and that's that. I mean, they had this full video made. It was, again, maybe just a matter of timing and when this was going to happen. And I think, you know, in terms of the vibe, I mean, I'm sure that there had to be, and this is just me guessing, not knowing the answer, but if you're just thinking about how this whole thing played out, where Stephen Pearl becomes the head coach, there had seemingly been a lot of people thinking this could happen. Maybe not as soon as it did, of course. But I said a week ago, I'm like, even maybe beyond at the end of this season, I'd maybe a little surprised if Bruce Pearl's still the coach at Auburn. And so I would think that in terms of them preparing their players this offseason and throughout the summer, you would think there was maybe some sort of hint that this could be something that was on the table. And maybe, you know, again, that there were situations where it wasn't fully addressed as the team, perhaps, but maybe there were just kind of, you know, those individual conversations of, hey, this may be what it looks like, but we'll find out if anything like that applies or if it was one where the players were just simply completely in the dark. And, again, you know how it works, Greg. The national guys can break stories, and sometimes that doesn't exactly maybe fit the timing you want and all of that in terms of, telling your team and getting everyone in the same spot and all that. So hard to know, probably just the complete vibe. But I think, again, the way this whole thing played out, it's not like Bruce Pearl is retiring and these guys are just entering a world of unknowns. They've got the rest of their staff right there. These guys have been playing together throughout the summer. They've started official practice now. And so obviously a bit more seamless of a transition than it would be, let's say, if he did actually just retire maybe at the end of the season.
Yep, it certainly is such an interesting ordeal because now his son Steven takes over as the interim coach, and he's been with Bruce Pearl on the staff for quite some time. And do you think that this Auburn team is going to be running relatively the same system as they did, or do you think that he might have a few wrinkles thrown in there?
I would think that, and we know how this works too, kind of in this era of basketball, certain coaches are given certain assignments when it comes to how you build out your staff. In recent years, Bruce Pearl's the head coach. You've got Mike Burgermaster, who's kind of been the offensive wizard, which, he's done a tremendous job in terms of kind of revamping the way they've played offense the past couple of years. And then Stephen Pearl has kind of been the defensive guy. He's been the guy who I think has been tasked with, all right, how do we make sure we're one of the best defensive teams out there? And so with them sort of splitting their staff that way, you could certainly say, all right, name a few things that may be a little bit different. Well, who knows? Maybe the guy who was the defensive coordinator essentially for this Auburn team, maybe they lean into a few different things on that side that makes, them a little bit different than what we were used to with Bruce Pearl. Not to say that Bruce Pearl didn't want to play defense. We know he did. But I think that you may see a few tweaks that maybe go more towards the defensive side of things for a team that, like I said, look at their finish the past 2 years. They've been a top 10 defensive team the past 2 seasons. Now, the roster looks a little bit different, and you don't have a Janai Broom in there, and you don't have, maybe just the overall depth that you had last year or the experience. But that would probably be the only thing, Greg, I would say. And look, I don't even think that's any sort of a drastic change or anything like that. Look at Bruce Pearl's teams. They always block shots. They always defend really well. Ultimately, I think they've had some of those same kind of characteristics throughout the years. And as you mentioned, Stephen Pearl has been along for the ride. And he's been right there playing a role in Auburn's success. And so I don't know that there's going to be anything sort of substantial that's going to change in terms of how they want to play.
Yeah, that is going to be such an intriguing question because as we know out there in the SEC, it's a dog-eat-dog conference and any sort of weakness and they will chew you up. So it is going to be very interesting to see how this Auburn team performs this season as Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And what were sort of your expectations for Auburn before this? Because I was feeling a little bit bearish on them. Like, I know that you bring back a guy in Ty Pettiford who's going to be very rock solid out there in that backcourt, but there is a lot of unknown. You mentioned the fact that they no longer have Broom this season. I think Keshawn Hall is going to be rock solid, but I don't think he's going to be what Broom was going to be, and I was expecting a little bit of a drop-off for Auburn even before this news personally.
Yeah, and I feel like I've kind of talked about the same 6 teams all off season in terms of like, hey, if I had to pull out a ranking right now, I hate doing it, but if I had to, to me, the 6 teams that are probably going to be in some order in that top 6, Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee. I think if you kind of look at it from that standpoint, the way that I have been kind of going in my rankings is Auburn's pretty much been on the low end of that. And I think it's just because I don't believe it's fair, even if Bruce Pearl was the coach or Stephen Pearl was the coach, I don't think it's fair to just assume that they're going to be able to replicate what they did last year, even the year before, because that was having a core group that was so experienced. All the jokes that were had last year, Greg, about these guys having, AARP cards and all this other stuff because you just had old guys. I think that, again, this year, it's not going to necessarily be that way. The leader on your team this year is basically a sophomore, and Tahad Pettiford plays like someone older than a sophomore, but he's a sophomore. And then you've got, some old guys coming in, and Keyshawn Hall, Keyshawn Murphy, who has SEC experience. Kevin Overton comes in and all that. But this is just a completely different group. And I think we have way more questions about this group than we had the past couple seasons, which is fair because it's kind of just a roster overhaul based on all the older guys exiting. And now you've got some new guys coming in. but they're not completely new to, Division I basketball or power conference basketball. And so I think Auburn's still going to win some games, and I would say that with Stephen Pearl or Bruce Pearl. I think they're still going to be a team that has enough talent to compete in the top half of the league. I don't see them just completely dropping off, but I did have more questions probably for Auburn than I did, certainly teams like Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, maybe Alabama, maybe. Like, I just think that for me, they've kind of landed in that 4 to 6 range a lot this offseason. Again, I don't think it's unfair to say, well, maybe they're falling more towards that 6 just based on the fact that they're losing what is, undoubtedly, in my opinion, should be future Hall of Fame coach.
Yep, no question about it. I do think that it's going to be such an interesting season for them. And while that coaching change, that certainly is something that is a bit of a shakeup, but not as big of a shakeup as we've seen over at Wofford. Now, Blake actually joined me for the SoCon Conference Preview Edition that I did on this podcast a few weeks ago, so we have to ask him about the Wofford situation next. Apparently, he knows a little bit more about Kevin Glitner than I thought that he did as well. We're going to compare and contrast these 3 coaching changes that we have seen here in the offseason, and I have to ask Blake about a team or two that he's feeling bullish upon for the upcoming season as well. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, and now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Sustain Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Sustain Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always a pleasure to be joined by Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He's hard at work getting set for the upcoming season. Follow him on the old Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And we talked about the shakeup over at Auburn. Now let's talk about a different shakeup over at Wofford, because you joined me for the SoCon Conference Preview Edition a few weeks ago. I personally had Wofford number 2 in terms of my projector or finish. Now things are looking very harebrained as of the time of this podcast. We have not seen any of these guys enter in the transfer portal, but I know that there have been threats made with Dwight Perry getting canned, that guys were not going to be playing this year, that they were going to be transferring out of the program, and they have pretty much until, I believe, October 11th to be able to do so, since he was canned on the 12th of September. You get 30 days to be able to enter in the transfer portal after your coach gets canned, so there's that aspect of things. But just how do you take a look at a wild and crazy Wofford situation for a team that they just made the NCAA tournament last year? It's over like off-campus meal plan use and things like that, and it just feels like a very murky and strange situation, and I really don't envy Mr. Glitner trying to be able to keep things afloat.
Yeah, again, this is such an unusual kind of scenario, and it's interesting because back when I was coaching, back in the day in high school, like I coached against Kevin Glitner, the new head coach at Wofford, and I'm just like, it's wild to be kind of seeing this play out the way that it had. But
did you beat him? That's the question. Did you beat him?
Probably not, Greg. That's probably why I'm sitting here. He's now the head coach at Wofford. But look, like you said, we talked about this Wofford team. They got to the NCAA tournament last year, had some, I think, sustainable success under Dwight Perry in his first 2 seasons. Just the way this whole thing played out, just such a wacky situation. And these 2 things we've spent 10 minutes already talking about, these are not the things you're expected to be talking about with coaches towards the end of September. And yet here we are. And, this is so different from the Auburn one. I'm kind of I'm glad, but I am kind of glad we have the compare and contrast situations here where we just said it. Like, Stephen Pearl is getting the job from Bruce Pearl, his father. There's no tough transition there other than the fact that it's a guy who has not been a head coach at that level. But they've been together. The players know them both. And so the new coach already has familiarity with the players and all this other stuff. Now, I know in this situation, it's different, right? You're talking about adding in a guy who simply has to come in. And yes, I know he was at Wofford 6 years ago as an assistant, but this is not the same team. And so he's got to come back now, take over a team at the end of September. And all of a sudden, anything you've done up to this point in the offseason, I'm not saying you got to throw it out, Greg, but you know how this works. Like, they're not the same people. Like, Kevin Glitner and Dwight Perry, not the same people. They're not going to be doing the exact same thing and structuring things the exact same way. So, as you mentioned, I think it'd be hard not to knock this team down despite the talent that's there, just because it is really tough to think about that from a player perspective. Not that the other situation with Auburn isn't, but at least there's a lot of familiarity there. Whereas this is just something where you're a month out from tipping off your season, and everything's kind of changed for this group.
Yeah, no question about it. And I'm very curious to see if any of these players jump ship, because when Perry was fired as the team's coach, a lot of these guys were saying that they were not going to be staying with the Wofford program. They have 30 days to enter in the transfer portal. And I think that that's the biggest thing right now as well, because last I checked, we haven't seen really anyone jump ship from Wofford. And obviously, if they decide to leave, their 2025-26 season is pretty much kaput, because there's not a lot of roster spots available for these guys. But I think that that becomes such a big, interesting aspect of this as well. And that's task number one for Kevin Glitner, just trying to keep guys on the team.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's like you mentioned the one reason, and of course, I've been asked this multiple times about Auburn too, with, well, what happens if everyone just transfers out? I'm like, well, the timing here is not ideal for those players. And it's not going to be something where you're going to have a lot of guys who are willing just to basically say, all right, I'm going to throw away an entire season. Now, if they're getting paid, they may. But it's still, in my opinion, something where I just don't think you're going to have a lot of guys, chomping at the bit to try to just get out and go sit for a while. These guys want to play. When you consider that, the work they put in the offseason, all those things, sure. Would it be surprising to see a couple of guys go elsewhere? No, not at all. Will there be plenty of coaches begging these guys to again, maybe be that one extra thing that they've already seen a look at their roster this offseason and been like, we're only one player away. And it's this guy right here that happens to be, sitting at the number 4 spot for Wofford or whatever. And so you're going to have that, because that's just, the way the rules work and everything. But it will be interesting, though, because, again, this is something we're making this move now, bringing in a coach that first time he's been in the spot. And then you're looking at the possibility of a drastically different roster if you do have sort of an exodus here. That's wild to be thinking about that for a team that just made the NCAA tournament last year.
Oh my gosh. I just have not seen anything quite like this in quite some time. And I just take a look at all 3 of the coaching moves that we've seen over the last 3 weeks, Blake, and that certainly is the worst of them. That, without question. Wofford, yeah, that's not great. But if I were ranking them 1, 2, and 3, I'd probably put Auburn at number 2. And I'm not sure how you feel about things, but honestly, out of the 3 big coaching moves that we've seen, I feel like St. Joe's is in the best shape, because even though they have Billy Lang step down, he decides to join the New York Knicks. I feel like Steve Donahue, from an X and O standpoint, he's an upgrade. He's not the recruiter that Billy Lang was. Lang was really good at being able to get guys in, but even though he got guys in, it felt like they never reached their full potential. It felt like St. Joe's year in and year out fell a little bit short. And for the season for St. Joe's, I know that a lot of people aren't feeling great about it. I don't think that there's much doom and gloom at all out there in the great state of Pennsylvania for these guys.
No, and I'm with you. Look, he's a guy that, and I know, Steve Donahue's in his 60s, and I know he felt like he was at Penn forever. And I don't know that they ultimately, reached that top level of success they wanted to. But at the same time, it's a guy that's been around a while, right? He had multiple stops in the Ivy League, was at Boston College those several years, which, was back when the ACC was very tough. And so it was hard to find that success. That's a tough job anyways. We've talked about that in the past. But now, being able to possibly step in and, like you said, have a somewhat of a positive momentum, perhaps. It's having someone, too, who's been in the program. Now, I know it's not been that long. He's been there now for 5.5 months, something like that, since he was the associate head coach. But again, it's at least some kind of continuity. And I think that's what the Wofford, situation is lacking here. Whereas with this, he has been in that spot. He's kind of prepared in the offseason. And yes, kind of a surprise to have your head coach leave a couple weeks ago to go to the Knicks. But any way you slice it, even if you look at kind of Donahue's overall win-loss record, it's not going to be anything that perhaps is going to stand out that much for a lot of people, based on a lot of his success came many years ago. But at the same time, he's been there. He's been with these players. And I think that's at least something, too, where, and the conference is in an interesting spot, as we've talked about before. I think it's kind of a, fascinating state of the conference right now. And it is a program, too, that had a lot of positive momentum coming into this season, other than the fact that they lost their coach. So all of these situations, it does feel like pretty much all of them have like bizarre circumstances surrounding them. But at the same time, you can see past the success for every single one of these guys, taking over in these coaching spots. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't look at this one as sort of that much of a negative, except for the fact that, Billy Lange done a pretty good job there at St. Joe's.
Yep, absolutely. And not very often that in the college basketball season, in the middle of September / late in September, we see 3 coaching moves happen over the last 3 weeks, but that's what we've got here, Blake. And certainly those 3 teams, I have a feeling that both of us have had a little bit of a change on the way that we're feeling about them for the upcoming season, but I know you're doing a great job over at Southeastern 16 getting set for the upcoming season, so this is open-ended. This can be an SEC team, this could be an East Coast team, West Coast team. It's dealer's choice on this one. Over the last, we're going to call it month or so, excluding the 3 teams that we just mentioned with the coaching changes, is there a team or two that you're just feeling a little bit differently about right now, whether that be to the positive or the negative?
Well, rather than express my love for NC State again, which I feel like I've done multiple times this
Hey, no reason not to.
The upside that I think that team has now with Will Wade there. I will stay in the SEC, Greg, because I've seen a lot of positive momentum on this front, and it's not just me. I think it's seeing a lot of these sort of advanced, statistical models come out and where guys like Evan Mia, and all these other places kind of where they have this team placed. I feel like there was a point early in the offseason where I was looking up and thinking, all right, I'm not going to be surprised if Vanderbilt is picked 13th or 14th. But I said, I think that's just a blatant, irresponsible placement of the Commodores because I think their roster is way better than that. And now as I'm seeing some of these, again, advanced models and all that come out, and I'm seeing Vanderbilt in that 7 to 9 type range, I like that because I think you're clearly, to me, looking at a team here that I don't know how much national love they will get coming into the season. But when I look at their roster and I look at the depth they have at a lot of different positions, and mainly I'm looking at the backcourt, which to me may be one of the best in the SEC in terms of just pure depth. They have the superstar like a Jacoby Gillespie and Otega Owe, Boogie Flan. Just go down the line with all the great guards. Pettiford, LeBaron Philon, maybe not. But I think the overall depth they have at guard and the way Mark Byington runs his system, where a lot of it is transition, getting guys out in space, and then you've got what I think was a very underrated player in Devin McLaughlin last year. You've added a lot of experience around him in the front court. I think Vanderbilt is the team to absolutely keep an eye on in the SEC and nationally. If I'm picking a list of 5 teams nationally that I think are probably going to be considered in that sleeper type category, I would be surprised if they're not one of them because they built a lot of momentum last year, and I feel like they've only improved their roster now overall to where they have the depth. They've got guys with some experience, and don't look now, but if Vanderbilt does have kind of that breakthrough type season, well, let's say they finish in the top 6, 5, something like that, I think Tyler Nickel is absolutely a guy that could be right there in that, all first team SEC type scenario, just based on his ability to score and shoot the ball. And you know this too, Greg, from being in Nashville, like the Vanderbilt teams that were always very successful and were able to compete at the top of the SEC. Now I know it's a different era, but those teams could shoot the ball. And they had multiple guys who could just simply step out and make threes. And I feel like this is the kind of team where, especially you're looking at Tyler Nickel, but he's got some guys around him as well. They didn't shoot the ball as well last year as we thought they would. But I think they're going to take a big step forward there. And I feel like offensively, top 30-ish type team, in adjusted efficiency and all that last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they're in that top 20 type range this year. And I think that'll be enough to maybe even get them beyond that 21 mark that they got to last year.
And being able to maintain Devin McLaughlin, I thought was very good as well because they did have a little bit of difficulty on the glass. They should be a little bit more shored up there. And your number 2 under Mark Byington, I think, is going to be a good one. So I am right there with you. And Blake, you just mentioned it. You're doing a great job over there out in Nashville, Tennessee. Unfortunately, you're not the new head coach of Wofford, but you know the new head coach of Wofford. So, hey, that was a very nice bonus as well. But you're doing a great job gauging this great sport that we all know and love. So love to give people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find all of our SEC stuff over at Southeastern 16. Lots of preview for the season already up over there. You can check it all out. And yeah, everything else, college basketball. You can follow me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
Blake does such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me on such great insights. So big thanks, Blake, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larzium, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. So I have 5 more conference previews coming your way, the Power 5, and the ACC probably should be up by the end of the week, so be on the lookout there. Blake, who joined me today, he's going to be joining me for the SEC preview relatively soon as well. That'll probably be the last podcast that I do, because that one is the back half in terms of alphabetical order, but be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for a fresh podcast every single day. We've went over 2,100 days without a missed podcast, so that streak will not be broken anytime soon, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
Sleeping hot and sweaty, tossing and turning all night is like being on a team that never has home field advantage. You're losing before the day even begins. It's time to reverse the curse and solve your sweaty sleep problems with Coop Sleep Goods. Their entire cooling collection, including pillows, sheets, and more, is equipped with cool-to-the-touch technology that actually stays cool all night long, no matter your sleep style. Their award-winning pillows are customizable for side, back, stomach, or combo sleepers. Put an end to thermostat wars and stop flipping to the cool side of the pillow. Save the sweat for big presentations in the boardroom or pickup ball in the rec room. Visit coopsleepgoods.com/sports to get 20% off your first order. If you don't sleep cooler and better, return it risk-free with their 100-night sleep better guarantee. That's COOP sleepgoods.com/sports.